All right. We're going to do this a little different today. We're going to do this via this video right here on YouTube. Just follow along like normal. Did not get a chance to print off your slide notes, but you can find those on Google Classroom, and you can kind of add in these notes later on. Right now, I would suggest just taking notes using the Cornell notes, or you can just take notes on a sheet of paper. And then once I get back, I will print out the slide notes, and you can just add your notes to the slides. All right, today we're going to continue on. We talked last week, or the last time we did the notes, about the lawmaking process, the process in which a bill becomes a law. Today we're going to move on and talk about the different duties of Congress, and just kind of round out the rest of this part of this unit. Before we get into the executive branch, we're going to finish up with the legislative branch. First thing we're going to do is talk about committees and how they conduct different things, and responsibilities of the House and the Senate and the way they affect policymaking. First thing we're talking about is duties of Congress. Okay, talk about the legislators, the people that make up Congress, and their basic duties is just making laws. Okay, they are the lawmakers of the House of the country, and that's what their first and foremost job is to make the laws. Okay, that's their main purpose. To that end, they are the members of committees where most of the work and lawmakers of lawmaking process happens. All right, so they make up all these different committees. We talked about last week about how that's really where the work is done. Okay, they vote on everything in Congress as a whole, but as far as all the researching and learning about what they're actually going to vote on, that all happens in committees and subcommittees. First committee we're going to talk about is standing committee. Okay, this is there's 20 in the House and 17 in the Senate, and this deals with issues that are permanent, as far as permanent legislative concerns. These are things that are always there. Okay, the things we're always going to talk about. Budget committees, environmental committees, things like that, education committees. They're things that are always going to have something that they need to hash out, so they're always a permanent part of the legislative committee as a whole. And like I said, each have several subcommittees below them. Then we're going to talk about a rules committee. Okay, the rule committee is basically the traffic cop of the whole legislative process. They decide, and this is really only in the House. It's not in Senate. But they basically allow or say which bills get to actually get talked about on the House floor and which ones will come up for a vote. So they kind of rule the legislative process in terms of what will be able to pass or not, or if when they get to be brought up and things like that. All right, then we have what's called a select committee. Okay, this deals with temporary issues, things that are not always up for debate, such as investigations into certain situations that may present themselves. Just know they're not, they're just temporary. They're not permanent. These are things, these could come up based on certain situations. Then you have a joint committee. All right, this is where members of both houses come together and talk about certain issues. Let's see. Make sure there's nothing I need to tell you extra about joint committees. Okay. Then you have a conference committee. Okay, this is where a committee may get together to make sure. We talked about how in order for a bill to pass, it has to be identical in each of the two houses. So there'll be a conference committee that may be established to talk about certain bills to make sure that they are in line with one another, so they'll get passed. Make sure they're identical. Then you have legislative oversight committees. Okay, these monitor the bureaucracy, all the workings of the government, and the execution of laws, and determine there's no corruption. Okay, so basically they just are put into place to make sure that from top to bottom of the government, that everybody that's doing their job is doing so without committing any crimes or doing things kind of underhanded. Make sure all the committees are doing things right, all the different agencies and things like that are doing what they're supposed to do. And any laws that are passed, they make sure that they're being that the executive committee is actually executing them like they're supposed to. All right, another duty of Congress is a representation or representative of the constituents. Okay, these are the people. Okay, basically they're the mouthpiece to the government of the people. So you and I, as the people, we voice our concerns to our representatives, and they're supposed to represent us to the government. The next one is servants of constituents. Constituents are the people they represent. Okay. If you visit your individual congressperson's website, you can see a bunch of services that they offer. There are services like military academy nominations. You can get a flag request. They'll send you flags. That's where you would go probably to get passports, internships, all kinds of things like that they will provide for you as a member of Congress. And the last one, of course, is just a politician. They're always on the campaign trail working to get reelected and continue service to their constituents. All right, now we're going to talk about chamber-specific procedures, rules, and roles that impact the policy-making procedure and process. Number of chamber and debate rules that set the bar high for building majority support. Here we're going to look at both of the houses right here. The House of Representatives is more centralized as far as its leadership. They have a rules committee that controls the agenda. Whatever this rule committee says, it goes. So they're in complete control of the process in general. There's limited debate time, so there's not a lot of as far as when they're talking about any individual bill, it is limited. They can't talk at length like they can in the Senate, and we'll talk about that in a minute. And the Speaker of the House is very powerful. Okay, currently it's Nancy Pelosi. She has almost complete rule of the House of Representatives. What she says goes. She can make the rules and end things and determine different orders and things like that. We get over to the Senate. It's less centralized leadership. It's more of a conglomerate in terms of everybody. Kind of the leadership is can be spread out more. Okay. Committees have less authority. Very loose debate. There's a power to filibuster. We'll talk about that here in a minute, which can be stopped with cloture. And the leaders are less powerful, except for the majority leader. And we'll talk about that in a little bit as well. Now we're going to talk about chamber-specific procedures, rules, and roles that impact the policy-making process. Talk about the roles of the Speaker of the House, the President of the Senate, party leadership, and committee leadership in both chambers. All right, first, the Speaker of the House. This is the highest ranking member in the majority party. You have the majority leader. Okay, this person represents their party on the floor. So they're the one that mainly speaks for their party, controls the talking points that their party is interested in controlling. Then you have the majority whip. They assist the leadership in managing the party's legislative program. They collect votes. They go around and kind of gauge what everybody's thinking about, what they're going to vote, so they can kind of see if they feel like they have the votes they need, or if they need to kind of flip somebody or talk to somebody. Basically, they just go around and determine how kind of get a temp on how the voting process may go for any individual thing they're voting on. You have the assistant speaker. They assist the majority leader. Then you have your minority leader. They represent their party on the floor. And your minority whip does the same thing that the majority whip does, but for the minority party. Today, they seem to kind of, instead of calling themselves the minority leader or minority whip, they seem to call themselves whatever party represents. So you'd have in the House, since the Republicans are the minority, instead of saying minority leader, they just say Republican leader, Republican whip. Then you have the Democratic caucus chairman. Okay, this person heads the organization of all Democratic Party members in the House or the committees. They tend to get these people together and kind of get them on the same page and make sure that they put people where they want them to go. Put them in committees they feel like they'll have the best knowledge to be able to contribute to. Just kind of organize the whole situation. Caucus, you may hear it called Democratic Caucus Chairman or Democratic Conference Chairman, Republican Caucus or Republican Conference. Okay, so they basically just head the organization of the particular party within the House. And then you have Republican Policy Committee Chairman. This is a person who heads the conference forum for their policy development within their particular committee. All right. Next, we're going to talk about the leadership roles within the Senate. All right. First, you have the President of the Senate. It's also the Vice President of the United States. Basically, the only role of the Vice President in terms of the Senate is in case there's a tie. So, you have 100 members in the Senate. If there happens to be a 50-50 vote, then the Vice President will come in and break that vote. Definitely has happened a lot of times. It can happen for many things, whether it be presidential appointments, can be laws, anything that the Senate has to vote on where there may be a tie. That Vice President can step in and break that tie. And that's really his only role in the policy making or law making process. The President pro temp presides over the Senate when the Vice President is not present. Okay, which is most of the time. The Vice President's usually rarely there unless there is a situation where a tie is thought about, based on the whips. They're feeling like it's going to be a tie. He may be brought in. He or she may be brought in to break that tie when it occurs. The President pro tem is also the longest serving member of the majority party, so that's who usually gets to be that particular in that particular role. Whoever's been the longest tenure within the majority party. Then you have the majority leader. Tends to be the most important job in the Senate when they represent the floor. Majority whip assists leadership in managing the party's legislative program, collects the votes, like I said, goes around, polls different members to see what they're thinking, how they're going to vote, to kind of get a pulse on how a vote may go. Then you have your minority leader and your minority whip. All right, next we're going to talk about chamber-specific procedures, rules, and roles that impact the policymaking process. We're going to talk about filibuster and cloture. Okay, we're going to talk about holds and unanimous consent in the Senate, treaty ratification and confirmation role in U.S. Senate. We're going to watch this quick video about clochures and filibusters.
These 100 people are the U.S. Senate. They pass laws. They vote, and when a majority says yes, it passes. But these days, the Senate doesn't do that very often.
The Senate holding 2 votes, both failed. It's completely dysfunctional.
4 versions of gun control proposals, and all 4 failed.
See, the Senate has this rule. It says before they vote, 60 people have to agree to have the vote. That means just 41 people, a minority, can entirely block a bill. This is called a filibuster. Early on, filibusters were rare. This is a chart of the number of times the Senate has had a vote to break a filibuster in the last 100 years. But in the last 50 years, they started to grow. And now, almost every big bill is filibustered. The US Senate is broken, and the filibuster broke it. But the Senate didn't always have this rule. In fact, it all kind of happened by accident. This is the Senate in 1805. It's much smaller than it is now, and the filibuster as we know it today doesn't exist yet. And before they vote on a bill, they debate. If they want to end debate and vote, they just need a majority to agree. But Vice President Aaron Burr thinks a high-minded place like the Senate should have as much debate as needed. So the Senate gets rid of the rule. Now senators can debate for as long as they want, and there's no way to stop them. This is the beginning of the Senate filibuster. At first, it isn't really a problem. Because the Senate is still pretty small, there's only so long a group of senators can physically talk. Eventually they tire out, debate ends, and they get to a vote. But as the US grows, so does the Senate, and they have more factions and more people to filibuster bills. They move to a bigger room, and now it's 1917. World War I is underway, but the US isn't involved. Then President Woodrow Wilson asks Congress to authorize a broad military action. A group of senators don't want to give Wilson the power to enter the war, so they decide to debate until the session ends, filibuster. Woodrow Wilson is mad, and he demands that they go back to the old Senate rules, that debate can be ended with a simple majority. The Senate doesn't want to do that, so instead they compromise. They change the rules so they can end debate with the approval of 2/3 of the Senate, so that if senators want to block a bill, they need a third to do it. This is basically the system we have today. A supermajority to agree to vote, then a simple majority to pass a law. And for a few decades, the filibuster is used, but pretty sparingly. Then in the 1950s, the Senate starts to consider civil rights legislation, and Southern senators really hate this. But they don't have the votes to actually defeat the bills, so they start using the filibuster to block bills. Here's South Carolina Senator Strom Thurmond. He looks tired because he just filibustered the 1957 Civil Rights Act for more than 24 hours. These filibusters are painstaking, and they block the Senate from actually doing work. The majority leader at the time, Mike Mansfield, doesn't like this. He's okay with needing a supermajority to pass things. What he doesn't like are these long, pointless speeches. So he makes a change. He skips the debate and goes directly to a vote to see if there's a supermajority to end debate. This means if senators want to filibuster, they don't have to stand up and talk. They can just threaten to, as long as they have the numbers to block a supermajority vote. This makes it way easier to filibuster. And the number of filibusters grows. In the mid-70s, the Senate changes the threshold needed to filibuster. Now instead of 34 senators, you need 41, but it doesn't make much of a difference. And then around the 2000s, senators in the minority start to realize something. They can gain more politically by fighting than by cooperating. So they filibuster everything the other party wants to do. That's what leads to this spike. Now, almost every big bill is filibustered. Finally, in 2013, the Democratic majority makes a change to the rules that says the filibuster no longer applies to certain confirmation votes. In 2017, the Republican majority makes another similar change. Both times, it feels like a huge deal. But now, things are beginning to change. The 2020 elections are coming up, and Democrats have some big proposals.
Healthcare in America.
Federal investment in teachers' salaries.
Investments in clean energy.
But Democrats know even if they have a majority in the Senate, they're not going to get the 60 votes needed to overcome a filibuster. And that's why a new idea is now on the table.
Would you urge the Senate Democratic leader to get rid of the filibuster?
I think we have to have that on the table.
To get rid of the filibuster.
Get rid of the filibuster.
Getting rid of an old tradition naturally feels radical. But here's one more story about the filibuster. The Senate is only one half of Congress. The other half, the House of Representatives, also used to have rules that allow the minority party to filibuster bills. Then, in 1888, Republicans won control of the House, but the filibuster rules kept them from actually passing anything. It was like the election, and ultimately the will of the people didn't even matter. So, they got rid of it. And the reasoning was pretty simple. If the party that loses an election can block the winners from doing anything, what does it mean to be a democracy?
All right, so that video talked about the filibuster and the cloture. Basically, filibuster is just talking a bill to death. Okay, the main purpose of filibuster is to ensure that a supermajority is achieved when passing any legislation. Okay, and a cloture can be invoked with 60 votes out of the 100. Okay, so any bill that receives 60 votes is filibuster proof. Okay, and today, like they said, it's just really just simply talking about a filibuster, threatening a filibuster would invoke cloture, so it never actually has to happen. Make sure you know that the record for the longest filibuster was set by Strom Thurmond in 1957, where he talked over 24 hours. Here are some other things we need to talk about. Unanimous consent. Okay, and basically what that is requested to suspend the rules and limit debate, and it speeds up the process to get to a vote. Okay, just basically it allows for any kind of arguing or just debate on a bill. It kind of puts a time limit on it, and once it's up, they have to go to a vote. And as long as they vote unanimously to do that, then they can put that into an action to where they can speed the process up a little bit. If they have a lot of things to go over and things like that, they could kind of better use their time. But it has to be through the approval of all the senators to do that. You have what's called holds. Okay, this is stalls in the discussion of a bill, used when someone objects to a bill being voted on. You have treaty ratifications. All right. In the Federalist 75, Hamilton argued that the Senate, not the House, should handle treaties in foreign affairs due to its continuity. Smaller, less turnover, things like that. So they felt like that the Senate should be who handles all that, and it requires a 2/3 vote to ratify any treaties. Then you have advice and consent. All right. Basically another way just to say confirming a presidential appointment. So if the president were to appoint, a new leader of education committee, things like that, or, the education director and things like that, Supreme Court justices, the advice and consent is basically what they use as far as the Senate to confirm those people. And there has to be a majority vote on that. All right, next we're going to talk about chamber-specific procedures, rules, and roles that impact the policymaking process. We're going to talk about roles of rules committees, committees of the whole, and discharge petition in the House. Rules committee, like I talked about earlier, it's just the House traffic cop. They basically determine, when and what gets voted on or talked about. And the majority party in the House controls this. Okay, so nothing reaches the floor for debate unless that rule committee allows it. Okay, so you can see why it's really, really important for each individual party to try to control the House, because there's not really, if you're the minority party, there's not a whole lot you can do sometimes to get certain things heard because everything's controlled by the majority party. Then we have committee of the whole. There has to be 100 members present in order to conduct this business. But basically it's a way for them to come together in a more relaxed rule environment and allow for longer debates on bills. Non-voting delegates, such as U.S. territories representatives, may vote. And if the committee approves, it can go to the full House floor. So basically it's a way for them to take a bill, and they can, have to get at least 100 members to be a part of it. But if they do that, then they can, kind of slow down and discuss a bill a lot longer, something that may be really important, something like that, and get it to go out and be researched really well before it actually goes to the entire House. And the last thing on this particular slide, we're going to talk about discharge petition. Basically, just this is when you get a simple majority and you basically want to get a bill out quickly. Think of it like it's blasted out of committee, like dynamite, it discharged out of there. Simple majority to make this happen, and it forces a bill to be released from committee and be debated and voted on the full House floor very quickly. So it forces the bill out of committee. All right, the next thing we're going to talk about, and I'm going really fast through all this. I'm trying to get this done in about 30, 40 minutes. That way you guys can move on to something else. But like I said, I'll put this video will be up on Google Classroom, so you're welcome to go back once you get your printouts and kind of fill in things. But if nothing else, just allow this to be kind of a fast overview of what we're talking about here. Next thing we're going to talk about is Congress must generate a budget that addresses both the discretionary and mandatory spending. And we talked about discretionary, where they can basically choose what that money's for. They can earmark it for certain things. Then you have mandatory, where the money, it has to go to certain things because bills that may have been passed require it to do so. Okay. We're going to talk about spending and opportunity, different things like that, as far as tax revenue, increase, budget deficits. The first we're going to talk about with Congress and money. First off, let's just talk about quick review. Remember that Congress must create a budget every year. Okay. They allocate burdens and benefits. Remember, burdens is what they must pay, and benefits is what they get in. Okay. They raise revenue by taking in taxes. Okay. So burden is what they pay out based on the budget, and then benefits is what they bring in to cover that budget. Okay. So let's talk about expenditures real quick. This is basically the spending of the government. You have discretionary spending. Okay. So Congress debates and determines who will get a piece of the pie. So basically they go through all these different processes and determine where all this money within this budget goes. Okay. What they're going to put here, what they're going to put there. All right. Discretionary spending. They can vote on and choose who gets what, what is funded and what is not funded. They make all those decisions. That's why it's called discretionary. It's left up to their discretion. Okay. Then you have mandatory spending. These are going to be things, entitlement programs that must be covered as a result of legislation. So these are things that have been voted on and enacted into law, and therefore to fulfill the letter of that law, these funds must be put out there and funded in order to fulfill that law, such as Social Security, Medicare and Medicaid, and unemployment programs. Make sure you know what a deficit is. This is expenditures exceed revenues in a fiscal year. So basically, if you have a deficit, then you are spending more than you're bringing in, and that's what causes us to be in certain situations where the national debt continues to grow because we're spending more than we're bringing in. The only way to fix that would be to spend less or to tax more. And neither one of those make everybody happy, because if you cut funding to certain things, somebody's going to be left out, not getting what they need or what they want. And then, of course, obviously, if you increase taxes, then that's less money in people's pocket, and that's, of course, going to make people mad. So that's why we live in a situation where Congress is usually working within a deficit, because trying to please those constituents and trying to get reelected, and end up working at a deficit a lot of times. All right, so now we're going to talk about balancing a budget. Require expenditures to equal revenue is one way to do it. You require that that there's no way that you can spend more than you bring in, would be one way to definitely work towards. Definitely one way to make sure that you're working with a balanced budget and you're not increasing national debt every year. So how can you do that? You can cut discretionary spending. Okay, obviously you have to fulfill the duties, the financial duties that you have created through your mandatory spending, but discretionary spending, you can cut those things. Okay, you can send less money to different areas and things like that. But like I said, you're gonna probably upset somebody, and you may not get elected, so they kind of tend not to want to do that, but that's one way to do it. Next way is to increase taxes. Like I said earlier, cut money, increase taxes. Is there an alternative? All right, this here is one of those slides that you don't necessarily have to know, but it's definitely good information. We're going to talk about salary of people in Congress. Base salary for somebody, for a congressperson, is $174,000 plus benefits. Okay, and the benefits are very, very good. We'll talk about those here in just a second. Plus, $174,000 a year is pretty good money. The vice president and speaker of House make $223,500 plus benefits. It's 193,400 for majority and minority leaders and the president pro temp. Pay increase does not take place until after the next congressional election. So basically, they can't vote to earn themselves a pay increase that they'll get immediately. Okay, therefore, if you don't know if you're going to be reelected, then it doesn't do you a whole lot of good to vote on something that you may not be able to take advantage of. And that was created with the 27th Amendment. They get travel allowances, very low cost insurance. They get free health care, and they get a pension. Okay, so those are parts of the benefits. They used to have a franking privilege where they could basically send mail instead of putting stamps on it. It was just with their signature, but they actually did away with that fairly recently. All right, the next thing we're going to talk about is pork barrel legislature. Okay, let me find my notes on that. All right, so pork barrel legislation and log rolling effects on the lawmaking in both chambers. So the power of pork. This is kind of a very not say popular, but almost like a infamous thing that a lot of lawmakers do. But basically, pork barrel spending is where money is set aside or earmarked in a bill for a pet project in a congressman's district. So basically, you put in money that is, we talked about discretionary spending, where it is put aside to a certain place, but then you may allow, you may vote for a certain bill or something like that if they agree to put a certain little bit of money in to help Louisiana's whatever. I'll vote for that if you allow money to go in directly to Louisiana or something like that. So it's money that's put aside for a pet project for somebody to help them get, people to vote for their bill so it'll pass through. The next thing is called log rolling. It's also kind of underhanded, where one congressman votes for another congressman's project, hoping they will do the same thing in return. And the last one is a rider. You can't see all that, but it's basically a non-related bill that is added to another bill that is likely to pass based on, if you got a bill say Republicans want a bill to really, really pass, then the Democrats can say, we'll vote for that if you'll put in this rider that the Republicans probably wouldn't vote on in a normal situation, but since they're putting it as a rider into that bill, since they really, really want this to pass and they want to have cooperation from the other side, they'll allow it to be a rider on that bill and pass it both on through. So those things are all three things, the way people kind of underhandedly utilize bribery, somewhat to get things passed through. All right, next we're going to talk about congressional behavior and governing effectiveness, and how they're influenced by ideological divisions within Congress that can lead to gridlock and create the need for negotiations and compromise. Basically just talking about how whether or not different sides work together, or they decide not to, and how it creates gridlock and wasted time and how things never get done. We're going to kind of talk about that and how they can effectively work together to actually get things accomplished. So you look at these two slides right here, basically just the breakdown of the 116th Congress, the most recent. If you look at the House of Representatives, you have 234 of the Democrats and 200 Republican with one unfilled seat. So definitely a majority in the Congress, in the House for Democrats. And if you look over here in the Senate, you see the Republicans hold a 53 to 47 majority, floor majority. Two seats are held by independents, but they caucus with the Democrats, so they count towards the Democrats. So there is a majority for Republicans in the Senate and a majority for the Democrats in the House. So you have to look at whether they want to compromise or not to compromise. Okay. First term you have is bipartisanship. Okay. This leads to negotiation and compromise. Okay. Where the two parties, bi means two, and then partisanship means the two parties So when they're working together, then they'll negotiate and then compromise and things actually get done. But when you have partisanship, this leads to gridlock. So you have your two groups. Here, this graphic here shows them kind of, intermingling, working with each other. This is bipartisanship, okay? Whether it be through log rolling or through pork barreling or whatever riders, they're working together. They find ways to pass things, and they pass. I'll vote for something that's not along the lines of my party, but for whether it's be personal gain or whatever. One way or the other, they work with each other. And then when you have partisanship, they kind of basically stick along party lines. We're not going to jump across to the other side. We're going to do what benefits our party. Things tend to only work out for the majority party, or things get gridlocked and nothing really gets done, nothing really gets passed. We've kind of moved a lot towards partisanship over the last several years. All right, the next thing we're going to talk about is congressional behavior and governing effectiveness and how it's influenced by gerrymandering. That's something we're going to talk about, redistricting and unequal representation of constituencies. We're going to talk about your two Supreme Court cases briefly, and about how they have had an effect on apportionment and on gerrymandering. First, let's talk about redistricting, okay? Census indicates changes in population. This happens every 10 years. We're actually in the process of a census right now. You've probably heard that term more than you care. I know I have. You drive down the road, you see the signs on the little electronic board saying you need to make sure you do the census. And this impacts reapportionment, okay? Because every year, based on the census, they're going to divvy up that 435 spots for each state, depending on, based on how many people you have in your state, based on population. Determines how many seats each state has in the House of Representatives. Okay, the permanent size of the House, as we know, is 435, and they're going to divide that up amongst the states based on their population. This has been going on since 1929. There's been a lot of growth in the West and the South after World War II, because a lot of people have moved to those areas. So those areas have grown, and of course, after census and the reapportionment, those areas tend to have gotten more representation over the years. This is 2010 reapportionment based on the change from from the year 2000. You can see in Louisiana we had 6 lost. Texas, I'm sorry, we had 6, so we lost. I think we had 9 prior to that. So all these different states either had, or you can base it on, it doesn't say how many they gained, lost, but you can see which states either gained, lost, or had no change. So obviously their population is shifting in a lot of these states for many different reasons. It can be job related. It can be a lot of push and pull factors and why people move around to different areas of the state, or it could just be people coming in, gaining citizenship, in living in these different cities. It's not necessarily that Louisiana is losing people, but maybe the other places are outgaining them, and therefore Louisiana lost some of its representation. Creating districts. The term gerrymandering is a term that is basically the drawing of district lines to benefit a particular political party. Here's a nice little image. You can actually, that comes up a lot when you look at gerrymandering. Requirements of creating districts, it must be contiguous, okay? Basically, it has to, they want it to be equal, to be broken up into lines that make sense, not just random things like that go along a certain racial divide and things like that. Has to be equal number of inhabitants. Has to be compact. It can't be spread out through a lot of area to where it's miles and miles and miles. They want it to be everything right there, and actually just basically to make sense as why they're creating these different districts. Some different strategies that are used: concentrate opposition in a few districts. They pack these districts in, try to find these areas that are very, very, overpopulated, very high population density, and they'll put those in there the same to try to pack those areas in to get some representation in those areas because it has such a high population density. They want to spread the opposition thinly to limit winning anywhere. This is called cracking. So you have packing and cracking when you're talking about gerrymandering. Here's gerrymandering explained with some visuals. So these are 3 different ways to divide 50 people into 5 districts. So if you have 50 people, 5 different districts, if you look at the left, basically you have 20 that are red and you have 30 that are blue. I guess that's it. 1, 2, yeah. Okay, 30 and 20. So you look to the right over here, you can see 3 different ways you can actually break this up, and you're dividing the same amount of people up, but there's 2 ways that you can make it, perfect representation. You have 3 blue districts and 2 red districts. Well, you have a majority of blue, so therefore blue wins. 2, it's compact, but it's really unfair because they've basically distributed the red they broke it up to where they never can win in any of the districts. So 5 districts, blue wins all of them. So blue wins the total overall. And then you have 3 where this is gerrymandering, basically where you draw these lines. Nothing is contiguous. Nothing is even. You have things spread out. So it's not really fair. It's not compact. But they've allowed now, based on these, random drawing of these lines, they were able to pack things in to where they made red win, even though the situation was exactly the same as it was in example 1 and 2. So that's gerrymandering. All right, Baker versus Carr. This is one of your Supreme Court cases you need to know for this unit. Not going to really talk much about it. Just know that it basically dealt with apportionment. You'll learn about that more on your own. And then Shaw versus Reno dealt with gerrymandering. Like I said, you need to look at that on your own. Getting pretty close here. We're going to talk next about congressional behavior and governing effectiveness as influenced by elections that have led to divided government, including partisan votes against presidential initiatives and congressional refusal to confirm appointments of lame duck presidents of the opposite party. And a lame duck president, if you don't know, is basically, the election happens in November. If you get a president that loses and he knows he's on his way out, between November and January when the new president takes over, lame duck president's basically, he lost, so he's just not going to really do much of his job. He's just going to kind of be in office and not trying to help the other party at all. So we're going to talk about that. Divided government. Okay, you can see right here. This talks about since 1968, there's only been 14 years, and all those years, only 14 of those years, has one party controlled all 3 facets of the government, the House, the Senate, and the White House. Okay, it's happened through Jimmy Carter, Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, Donald Trump, and Barack Obama. It's not current with Donald Trump, but during part of his tenure, it has. So, obviously, if you can look and you say, well, is that a good thing or a bad thing? Well, it's obviously a very good thing for that particular party if they're able to control all of those areas. But, there are definitely some things you can think of being a bad thing either way, because there are definitely some things pushed through that, definitely do not benefit members of the minority party. So, and a lot of times, if you control if the president can, whatever party the president is, if he can control one or the other, usually that's a good thing, for that particular party as well. Let's talk about the effects of a divided government. Talk about partisan votes against presidential initiatives. This is just a graph showing about when Congress agrees with the president. A lot of these things are very, very highly regarded as passing. Okay, the chances of them passing are obviously very, very high. Congressional refusal to confirm appointments of lame duck presidents of opposite parties. So, say you have, say this election, say if Donald Trump did not win and became a lame duck president, anything, he tries to push through, the Democrat-held House of Representatives probably would not vote on any of it, okay? But being that the Senate is controlled by the Republicans, any kind of maybe appointments that they would vote on, they probably would vote for those things to pass through. So that's why the party lines is very, very important. Next, we're going to talk about congressional behavior and governing effectiveness, how it's influenced by different role conceptions of trustee, delegate, and politico. These are based on how the different ways that different congressmen vote, based on how they should vote or how they do vote. The first term is trustee. These are basically people who just they use their conscience to vote. Okay, if they agree with certain things, they're going to vote for it. If they disagree, they're going to vote against it. It doesn't matter what the party line is. They're going to vote based on how they feel on what's best for the situation. You have delegates. These are people, they're agents for those who elected them. They're going to vote in the best interest of their constituents. They're going to do what they feel is wanted by the people that have to vote for them next term. Trying to please their constituents so they can be voted back into office. Then you have partisans. These are people who are completely allegiant to their party. They may think something's wrong. They may be against abortion, but they're if their party has a certain viewpoint on it, they're going to go with their party. Okay. Then you have politicos that basically says they're a combination of all. They kind of do a little bit of everything. Okay. So those are your four main types of congressmen in terms of how they vote. And that's going to be the last slide for that. That's going to wrap that up. Don't want to get into the executive branch right now. Hopefully I'll be back early or when we come back from the break. At this point, just go ahead and finish working on your the 2 worksheets that I passed out the other day. You can work on your reading questions, try to get all that done. Like I said, I know I sped through this really fast, but it's going to be, the link will be on Google Classroom. You can go watch that over the next couple of days. You can print out the slide notes and kind of fill them in as you go. If you got any questions, just leave a response on the bottom of the video on Google Classroom, and I'll get back to you as soon as possible. Hope to see you guys soon. Have a great day.